I'm unmuted. Okay, so hello to everyone. We're again just getting ourselves sorted out at this end. So we'll just start in a minute or so. Got different lighting this morning, so if I'm glowing sort of very healthily, it's because there's a red light on me. Okay, and we've got Ben on tech this morning, visitor from Oxford. I've known him for a long time, yes.
We won't go into that. We won't go into that.
So there's people joking because I ordained Dharma Pakshin, who was Ben's father. Ben ought to be in the order by now. It's just that his ordination course got cancelled because of COVID. All right, so we're still developing Bodhicitta, and yesterday we looked at particularly point 4 in the way the practice is laid out. And in the evening, I led the Bodhicitta practice with the refuge in our heart. And I got a note from City in Australia saying that I'd described that at one point at least as a self-development practice. And if I did, it's just too many selves and then things beginning with D. I meant self-discovery. And maybe it's worth just going back into that again, just to clarify. Ben, have you got that table handy?
Yep, I'll just bring it up.
Yeah, thank you. So, been talking a bit about the practice and refuge in terms of Subhuti's paper about 3 myths of the spiritual life. And in that, there are self-development, self-surrender, and self-discovery. But you can expand it a bit, and then you have 4 possibilities. So if we let me know as and when the table's up. Or, yeah,
it should appear on the screen too when it's up.
Okay, great.
It's the computer there.
Right. So we'll have a table for you very shortly. But the 4 divide into a sort of outward-facing approach, where the refuge is out there, and an inward approach, where all the qualities are within us. And they also divide into a more active approach and a more receptive approach. So that gives you 4 possibilities. You can have outward facing and active. You can have outward facing and receptive. You can have inward facing and active, and inward facing and receptive. And if we go through those, then the outward facing and active is self-development. So, yep, there you got it, good. So the refuge is out there. The Buddha has gained enlightenment, he's taught the Dharma, and we are following the path to achieve what he achieved. So it's putting emphasis on making one's own strong effort. But then you can also have a sense of the refuge there, out there, and all this is sort of in inverted commas. So in the table I've got outside and inside in inverted commas, just to emphasize that these are just, as Subhuti calls them, they're myths. They're helpful approaches, but they can't correspond to reality. Well, they can't anyway. I mean, actually, all language that we use should all be in inverted commas, because you can't take any of it literally. It doesn't do justice to how things are. So then we have outward facing towards the refuges, but now really opening to the refuges, letting the refuge do the work, receiving the blessings of the refuge, feeling that us as an ego entity, it's beyond us to arrive at awakening. So we open to Amitabha or the Buddha or Ayudam, and there's self-surrender. So you have the active approach and receptive approach. And it's interesting that Bhante, in terms of meditation practice, in his system of meditation, he'd talk about doing active practice like mindfulness of breathing or metta bhavana, and balancing that with just sitting, which would be a receptive practice. And he felt there should be a kind of rhythm in your meditation, moving between those two. And meditation is a kind of workshop for life, so that would also apply for Dharma life as a whole. Okay, so that's the outside active and receptive, and then there's the inside active and reflective. And if we see it like in those terms, then the qualities of awakening are in us, waiting. Either you can see them more as potential, but they're in here. And so the model is that there's just some dust on our eyes, little or more, but it needs clearing away. There are these adventitious defilements. So we need to purify what prevents those qualities from shining through. So the finding of those qualities is self-discovery. And if we're actively purifying, then yes, that's the active self-discovery. But you can also, particularly as your practice goes deeper, adopt a receptive attitude to what's inside. And with that, there's a deep trust in the nature of mind. There's a deep trust that the qualities are there, and that there's the reason why they're not fully expressing themselves is because we're doing all this selfing. We're filling all the space with me and thoughts of me and my concerns, and so those qualities don't find the space to radiate and to show themselves fully. So with that viewpoint, the movement of going for refuge is one of complete relaxation. It's one of relaxing selfing, just letting go all this effort of me to get somewhere, me to do anything, just to open to those deep forces, those qualities, that refuge that one trusts is within. And one description of that is emergence. It's a word that's used for it. So those are the four. So you've got active and receptive, outside and inside. So the way of practicing with the refuge in your heart is moving into self-discovery if you're being active, and it's encouraging emergence as you adopt a more and more receptive attitude to it. There's all sorts that we can unpack out of it, but hopefully that just gives you some a kind of at least a basic grasp of this model. Yes, so, and I hope it clarified any confusion that I produced by mislabeling things yesterday. Okay. Something else needs saying before we go on? Oh, I've had a lot of questions. Thank you very much. They're very interesting. Some of them have been really helpful just in giving me kind of pointers in where to go with the teaching. And some of them have been, I'm not going to be able to answer over these days. Some of you have been really inspired to write sort of mini essays. But I will one way or another, I'll get back to you. So hopefully I'll cover everything. But one quick thing was somebody wanted to know, yesterday I was talking about those three models of the ruler, the boatman, the boat person, and the shepherd, and wanted to know just where that came from. I mean, where I know it comes from is the jewel ornament of liberation of Gampopa in his exposition of Bodhicitta and the Bodhisattva path. But everything in that book, as I will go back to India and to Mahayana sources, so I'm sure that's just one example that's sort of quite well known in the West, where it's mentioned, but you'll find it all over the place. So in his version, it's king, boatman, and shepherd, because he lived in that kind of society where it would be king rather than ruler. Okay, so let's go on now and move on to section 5. So we've been reflecting on the futility of the situation where all living beings are suffering because they just don't know, they can't see the way out of suffering, so they keep doing what they always do, which is grasping at a self, grasping at everything as real, and that can go on indefinitely. And we've already opened out our vision through opening into the vast blue sky. We've made contact with the refuge, and so we've made contact with the way out, at least to some extent. And so seeing that there is a way out, so seeing all four noble truths, then we resolve that we'll go for refuge for the benefit of all that lives, for all beings. So that's the story so far. So in this episode, we move on to section 5 and 6 and Tonglen, giving and receiving. So with that resolve, the text says, one then repeats as many times as possible, with all beings, I go for refuge to the three jewels. With all beings, I go for refuge to the three jewels. And I discussed a bit yesterday how there are different ways of doing the practice, different presentations. And so depending on how you've been practicing, some of the ways of working will bump up against this line and feel that it doesn't work. And I had a little talk to Subhuti just recently, and well, little talk, it was an hour and 40 minutes, and we talked about all sorts of things and lots of Dharma. But I mentioned that I was going to lead this retreat and raised one or two of the points that people have made to me. And he said, well, if this line really doesn't work for you, well, yeah, that's fine. Leave it out, or you can adapt it a little bit. Yes, the practice has to work for you. So as it's written, you keep on saying this. Yeah. So whilst you're repeating this, you then do Tonglen. And again, see if that works for you. Yes, if it works, then what happens is that that with all beings, I go for refuge to the three jewels. It just keeps on and on, sort of resonating in your heart, resonates through your being again and again and again and again. And that momentum sort of adds to you're just building that momentum of going for refuge for the sake of all beings, that altruistic dimension. And then the expression of that is the Tonglen. Yeah. Some people I know will find that it's just, there's too much going on to do that, for that recitation to be there, and for there to be all that's happening with the breathing and all that's happening with seeing what's happening with living beings, with the lights and so on. So yeah, again, we go to the principles, we find what works most effectively for us, but always being aware, we can always come back to the practice as a template, as a model, and then we can check out. It's good with any sadhana practice, well, with any meditation practice. From time to time, you go back to the instructions that you were given, and you see, oh yes, in some ways I've made them my own, and now perhaps I do some of it a bit differently. But you just check that you're still in line with the principles of the practice and the thrust of the practice. And also sometimes you notice details that have just fallen out. Yeah? There you are, you're visualizing Padmasambhava, but actually some days, the Khatvanga just isn't there. It's just, you've just been really focused on other aspects. Or whatever it is, just maybe small details. So it's good to keep coming back to the practice and sort of be in dialogue, your experience with the practice as it's been presented. Okay, so that brings us on to Tonglen, which is this giving and receiving, using the breathing. And in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, it's a very central practice. It's the main practice of what in Tibetan is called mind training, lojong. And it's a whole set of practices, actually. It's a whole set of practices, all of them using this exchange. Tong means giving, and Len means taking or receiving. And always with the aid, with the support of the breathing. It's like the breathing is an analogy or a metaphor for what's happening what's happening in our heart as we do the practice. We link it to the actual taking in of the breath of life and the giving out of the breath. It's sort of a lot of these practices that come from the Tibetan tradition, they're always looking in some kind of way to engage all of you, so body, speech, and mind, and so including the breath and including the energy in different ways really intensifies the practice. It means that it doesn't just stay on a mental level or even on a heart level. We're aiming to include all of us. So the version of the Tonglen that we're doing here is that whilst one is repeating this, with all beings I go for refuge to the three jewels, as one breathes out, one visualizes that whatever wholesome roots are within one become like moonlight. And so wholesome roots is whatever is positive within us, whatever is positive within our mind, and whatever the punya, the merit of previous actions, all those, they all become like moonlight, which shines out with one's out-breath, falling upon all beings, entering their bodies and conferring on them great bliss. So the way the verse, the paragraph is put here, it's quite a sort of self-development approach. We're relying on the wholesome roots, but it's at least not explicitly relying on the wholesome roots that are included in the whole of the refuge, if you see what I mean. You could take it as, yeah, you're relying on your own practice. And you can do it like that. That's a way to practice. But as we've seen, you can also do it from other points of view, where it's the refuge that's doing the practice. So we're not relying on the limited sense of self at all. So those positive qualities become like moonlight. And again, if you're a visual person, you can see light going out, and again, that's helpful. If you're not, there's just this sense of something that's you have the emotional equivalent of moonlight that you feel and sense going out in all directions to all beings. So that goes out with your out breath, and it falls upon all beings. And again, you can focus on particular beings, particular situations, or have it more general. I mean, we need to be practicing within a spectrum of the very specific, the particular, and the vast. So even when we talk about practicing for the sake of all beings, yes, we need that sort of vast vision. Actually, our heart won't be satisfied by anything less than that. But also, that can become a bit of a generality. Yes, oh, yes, we love all beings. And then the person next to us does something we don't like. And somehow we haven't included them in all beings. So we also need the really specific as well to include definite situations and people, at least some of the time in our practice. Yes, in practice, all beings very often means the person we're with or the people we're with. So in direct experience, all beings for me now is Ben, Sadanandi, Vijayamala, Sadaloka, and 24 of you that I can see. No, there's two. There's Alia Sri Henstad under there. It's 25 of you that I can see on this particular screen that I'm looking at. Yeah. So all of you that I can see on the screen, all of you who are here plus me. So all beings is 30 beings right this moment. So I just need to do my best to care for these beings. So wherever we are, if we really care for that person right in front of us, perhaps even with the feeling that that person is the representative or the embodiment of all beings for us right now, then we keep practicing like that. That will do it. That will do it. So this moonlight goes out to a particular situation or to many situations, and in principle and in feeling, at some point goes to all beings. And it enters their bodies and confers on them great bliss. So it's important to see the practice, to feel the practice having a positive result. This is one of the points that Analia was making in that paper that I shared with you, which I do see as a discussion paper. I don't necessarily think there are arguments both ways about some of the points he's making. But yeah, it is important that we see, feel our heart wish being fulfilled through the practice. It's one of the ways in which we avoid being pulled down by our encounter with so much suffering. And it also means that we are entering in situations with a sense of the potential of the people that we're encountering. Whoever they are, however difficult their situation is, there's always some possibility that there can always be positive movement. It can always, something can always move in the direction of awakening. And then also, the practice is a mind training for us. And it's like any kind of training, particularly these days, you know, sort of psychologists will encourage you, if you're training any kind of skill, that you visualize the result that you want to bring about. That gives your mind a message of, you know, this is what we want, this is what we want. And also, it is very encouraging, at least, if not fulfilling, to see, yes, you know, our heart wish for the world coming true. Because also, when we're seeing these beings and these situations, there's an outside element and there's an internal element. It's like when we do metta bhavana. Yeah. So in metta bhavana, you know, I do it in the traditional way. I unfold metta for myself, and then I include a good friend, and a neutral person, and somebody I find difficult, the enemy, and they are specific people in the world. But also, inevitably, this practice is a kind of psychic theatre in which I'm working with different aspects of myself. I might not even think of it in those terms, but through the practice, I'm also contacting those aspects, somebody who represents something of those aspects of myself that I like and I appreciate, aspects of myself that I feel ho-hum about, don't really notice, don't value, and aspects of myself that I don't like, that I hold myself away from, that, you know, I don't really want to think of as part of my ego mandala. Yeah? And through the metta, yeah, I'm working on those aspects of myself. Yeah? Whether I think of it like that, I might just be thinking of, well, there's my good friend and I'm doing metta for them, and there's this person I find difficult and I'm including them in the metta. Do you see what I mean? So it's the same with this practice. Yes, it's a practice for the world, but it is also a practice which is working on all our psychic contents, to call it that, all the different aspects of our own mind, to call it that in inverted commas. So the moonlight shines out with our out-breath, falls upon all beings, you know, perhaps particular beings, particular situations, and then more and more and more. Yeah. And then it confers on them great bliss. So we see them becoming freer and happier and more joyful, and their energy flowing more freely and becoming more aware and finding the Dharma. So all that unfolds. And usually we go through a process with that. But it is important to get to that point in the practice, so that the practice moves from being a practice of compassion to becoming a practice of sympathetic joy. So where we're left in the practice actually isn't with, oh, there's so much suffering in the world, and oh, that's really difficult, but I'll do what I can. Where we're left with is a sense of, yes, there's so much suffering in the world, and I have a vision of it being transformed, and that's what I get up with. So, yes, when we go into our day, still we've got work to do, but it's the difference. Bhante often talks about on the spiritual path. There's a difference between, if you've got a mountain to climb, you either kind of slog up the mountain, sort of, being aware of, still you're only kind of in the lower slopes, and, this rock's really hard to get over. And someone who is just entranced with the vision of what it's going to be like at the summit and just how fantastic it is, and that sort of carries them along. Yes, they're still kind of, having to go through the lower slopes and climb over those rocks, but they have that vision that just sort of drives them and inspires them. So we want to come out of the practice sort of inspired by that vision, and going into the day, yes, meeting suffering, but meeting suffering with a sense of, and there's a refuge, and there are qualities, and there are resources, doing it like that. We don't want to sort of come out of our morning meditation, having done the Bodhicitta practice, feeling like, oh, there's, I've already encountered so much suffering, and I've actually got to go and meet some real suffering, and I've got the resources. You get the idea? Yeah. Any questions around this so far? There's a lot to unpack with all this. So. Anybody want to ask anything, either through the chat or just put up a hand, unmute yourself? No.
I've got a question.
Who's
Dharmashri.
Oh, hi, Dharmashri.
Yeah. So we imagine people becoming, sort of moving towards enlightenment. We don't imagine just any day-to-day suffering being relieved.
Okay, yeah, I'll happy to unpack that. So in the practice, you can work on different levels. You can work on seeing the that bodhicitta energy, to call it that, alleviating any of the three levels of dukkha. And so when the light goes out, it sends out, and the breath, the qualities go out. They meet suffering just as it's just where it is, and what the beings receive is just what they need. And so part of the training for us of doing the practice is that there can be this feeling, well, yes, what if I'm thinking about a particular person or a situation, well, what is needed? There can be some empathizing going on, thinking, okay, yes, what will help here? But if we don't know what helps, well, that light of awareness and love and compassion and bodhicitta, that always helps. So you can always send that. But you can also send, imagine that specific things are going out. So, yes, you could be sending healing to people who are sick. For instance, that would be one way of practicing with that first level of dukkha, the suffering of suffering, what we all recognize as suffering. But then, good as that is, as we've seen, even if we keep on managing to find ways of alleviating that level of suffering, there will always be more. There will always be more, because conditioned existence will always throw up more suffering. So we really want to make sure that we don't just end up working on that sort of everyday level of, yes, may so-and-so's anxiety about their job be alleviated, or may so-and-so who has the flu, may they feel better. Yeah, we want to get onto that level of, with all beings, I go for refuge to the three jewels, and what will finally cure suffering. So for that, we need to move on to levels of addressing the causes of suffering. So addressing the klesha and nyaya, the kleshas and the mistaken views of reality that are underlying those things. And we finally want to have that light that goes out, establishing beings on the path to awakening. So we want to end up with a pure land, to call it that. We want to end up with a field of beings who are all know the truth, who all are filled with love and compassion, and therefore filled with bliss. Conferring on them great bliss. Great bliss is mahasukha. And maha in Mahayana terminology and Vajrayana terminology means associated with knowing the nature of things, knowing the empty, insubstantial nature of things, knowing the true nature of things, the true nature of mind. That's what the bliss is established in, and that's why it can't be lost. So that's the level of things, and we need that level, because otherwise, we can contemplate, the suffering of the world, and there's a strong sort of gravitational pull of that suffering for us to sort of be kind of drawn into it, for it to trigger our own sort of hopes and fears. So we need to be really established in the practice, in that wider vision, in that Dharma vision. And then sure, with that, yes, may even the smallest headache, yes, may it be relieved, absolutely. We're not leaving anything out, but we want the central place in our mandala to be bodhicitta. Okay.
We have a few comments and questions in the chat.
Yep.
There was one person who was just celebrating your point about transforming karuna into mudita.
Oh, yeah.
Just celebrating that. They said that was very helpful. And there are several other points. Some of them are a bit long to be reading.
Okay.
One of them is, do you think visualizing your heart wish will help you to spot opportunities to develop specific opportunities and to help that to happen?
Do I think visualizing my heart wish? Yes, I think that the more ways of being clearly in contact with our heart wish we have, the more we'll respond from it. So yeah, if you can visualize your heart wish in some way, how do you do that for you? Yeah, great. You know, I sometimes visualize my heart wish as a sort of wish fulfilling jewel, for instance. There's actually a way of practicing Tonglen where you imagine yourself as a wish fulfilling jewel, and you practice, you know, kind of almost like through the day from there. It's like as you're walking down the street, you know, you're just sending out light and just sort of fulfilling the wishes of beings, you know, all those deep wishes. Anything else?
Let's see. Someone was asking for a reminder of the 3 levels of dukkha, 3 types of dukkha.
Okay, it's 3 types of dukkha. So there's the suffering of suffering, dukkha. So that headache, that fear of spiders, that's whatever it is that we would all recognize as suffering. There's viparinama dukkha, which is the suffering of the fact that everything is changing, and we're trying to hold on to things. So even our happy experience, if it's based on clinging to something which is going to change, is insecure. Yeah. And it's sort of like potential suffering. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. Yeah. If I'm attached to, you know, some possession or other, you know, one day either it will break, or something will happen to it, or I'll be on my deathbed and thinking, oh, I'm leaving it behind. So yeah, it's potential suffering. And then the third one is kanda dukkha or skanda dukkha, which is the suffering of being identified with the 5 skandhas, yeah, being with this psychophysical organism, and creating a sense of a me, which immediately creates a sense of another out there, separate, and all the difficulty of that feeling of being cut off from life. Okay.
Maybe 1 or 2 more, if you've got time.
I have time.
I'm not sure how to form this into a question, but someone was saying it could be easy to be glib about great bliss arising, and they imagine that you would have to be very strongly rooted in the sense of the refuge.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Great bliss rolls off the tongue really easily, doesn't it? and sounds lovely. It's interesting. It's interesting. So, on one side, we want our practice to be rooted in experience, and we know that beings do not easily become blissful. But I was talking to Lama Tillman, who guided my 3-year retreat at one point, and doing sadhana practice where there's lots of mention of great bliss. And he was saying, well, you know, you start with the roots of that. You start with what's leading in that direction, yeah, in your practice. You find the shoots of happiness and sukha, and positive emotions based on skillfulness, and you build from there. Yeah, so you can do it like that. But in the practice, we're not limited to what feels like it's possible in the real world. Yeah? mind to be really flexible, apart from anything else. You know, we want mind to be able to really encompass, you know, what does it feel like? You know, great bliss. You know, we want to be not just limiting ourselves to, you know, this thin kind of band of lukewarm positive emotion, because our minds are capable of so much more than that. So yes, we need to be realistic in terms of, you know, what's immediately possible, you know, in the external world. But in our own practice, we also want to be able to let rip, if you like, and imagine, you know, fully imagine, you know, beings transformed. And we often bring our everyday assumptions into the practice. So we think, well, it's going to take an awful long time for these beings to arrive at great bliss. You know, I'm going to have to sit here, you know, for a couple of hours, you know, sending out the moonlights, you know, and it'll gradually, you know, they'll gradually kind of crawl out of their, you know, sort of miserable state, you know, into a sort of human state, and then they'll get a bit better, and eventually we'll get them to great bliss. But that's all our ideas. That's all a whole kind of layer of conceptual thinking that we're putting onto the practice. Yeah. Why does it have to take so long? And if we're channeling or practicing from, you know, that sort of power of the Buddhas, how long does that take for great bliss to arise? It's because we're still sort of stuck in our sort of everyday, you know, mindset of here's me, you know, with my limited resources, and there's these suffering beings, and then I send them out what I can manage, and that, you know, that helps them a bit. You know, you know, we are aiming to open our hearts and open our minds. So yes, the practice kind of comes along and challenges us and says, right, you know, feel this great wave of love and compassion coming through you from the Buddhas, you know. Feel this tremendous energy that comes from Padmasambhava. Yes, and feel just what an impact that has on the world. You know, watch the suffering just fall away, you know. Watch them all light up. No, feel that, you know. Let's kind of, you know, get a bit of darkeny dance into our practice here and there. So, yes. We work with these extremes. We work with, yes, you know, this is how the everyday world often is. And we don't want to just sort of take off into, you know, some airy-fairy cloud cuckoo land. And we work with, yes, you know, we are, you know, disciples of the awakened one. We're doing these practices which have been used by realized beings for the last, you know, 2,500 years, and they're powerful. And we should let them be powerful. And we notice where we stop them being powerful by what we're telling ourselves. Well, okay. Yeah, because it's also interesting how if you're with somebody who is very deep in their practice, you know, like I used to, when I was Bante's secretary, watching people come to see Bante, they come with some awful problem, and they're going to see him, and they come out afterwards sort of beaming, and I'd say to them, oh, you know, what did Bante say about that issue that you had? And they go, oh, I forgot all about it. I didn't ask him. And that was because, you know, in that sort of field of Dharma that was around Bante, you know, they weren't that person who had that problem. You know, it just wasn't there. Yeah. So we don't want to underestimate the power of the Dharma. Right, after that little whatever it was, I think we probably should have a break. We haven't meditated yet, have we? Oh, let's meditate for a few minutes. Yes, sorry. Let's do that thing. So, how is it now? This body, this breath, these emotions, these thoughts, this energy. This awareness. How is it to be in contact with the earth? How is it to be poised between the earth and the sky? How is the body now? With its feelings and sensations. How is the breathing now? And how is our heart center? Now, for a few minutes, let's have a sense of the refuge in front of us, or available to us. Let's breathe in all the qualities of enlightenment, of awakening. Really taking them in on the in-breath. Can be in the form of light if that helps. And then with the out-breath, sharing them. Maybe to start with, a particular personal situation who you're practicing for. And then widening out. feels right, we can increase awareness of who we're practicing with, all the refuges, all the lineage of practitioners, all those on the Bodhisattva path, all those with that aspiration, all those we're meditating with right now. Breathing all that in, all those qualities and richness. And the power of all that love and wisdom going out like a great wave, washing away suffering. And as that great wave washes away suffering, seeing the results of that, seeing beings becoming free, finding the refuge, finding their own riches of love and compassion and wisdom. Becoming joyful. Now relaxing, nothing to do. Nothing to do except share the benefits. Trusting life, not holding anything back. Okay, so let's have a break. Let's see if we can start again at past.
Famous.
Yeah, thank you.
Front of me.
Tell me when.
Okay, ready.
Okay. Well, welcome back. And before the break, we were looking at section number 5, and we'd started exploring Tonglen, and we ended up talking about great bliss and the power of the Dharma, and then we did that short meditation. So the Bodhicitta practice, in a way, is encouraging us to encompass the full range of what we are as human beings and human experience, and it's quite a challenge and quite a paradox. Here we are, in this little, body, however tall it is. Well, there's a sutra in the Pali Canon, in the Udana, where the Buddha talks about within this human body, 2 cubits in height, is the arising of the world and its passing away. So we are this extraordinary paradox of, there's the human body, which is wonderful, but is very limited and subject to all kinds of aches and pains and struggles. And we have our everyday self, which is caught up with going to the supermarket and is our grandchild all right, and this and that. Just everyday, the ordinary everyday things. And then, along with that, there is this incredibly, this incredible reservoir of deeper experience and a mind that isn't limited by the physical body or its point in space and time. And somehow we have to bring those together. Somehow those two have to kind of meet and marry in a spiritual practice that includes it all. So we don't want to get have a limited vision of ourselves as I'm just this little being, wandering around this kind of planet, and I'm one of 8 billion others, and on this bit of rock that's kind of wandering through the infinity of space. We don't want to get lost in all the detail, but at the same time, we don't want to do a sort of bounce off that into some kind of vague, kind of cosmic, woolly, gentle, peaceful cloud, where we don't engage with and address our experience in this world and meet with this suffering and so on. Yeah. So the practice is aiming to help us to bring all the resources of that wider vision and all the deeper resources that are there of love and compassion and wisdom and so forth, and to connect them both with the wider vision of all beings, but also with each specific situation that we come in contact with, with us in our life, with this person that we meet, with this person trying to work out how to use Zoom, with that person drinking their tea, very precisely and clearly. So we somehow have to hold that contradiction, not limiting the vision of the totality of ourselves as human and, as it were, more than human. Really opening to that. We talk about spiritual development. That's the sort of spiritual aspect and even the transcendental aspect. But then not doing spiritual bypassing, where we sort of sit on a lotus cloud and avoid all the nasty, unpleasant feelings that are generated by us when we come up against the friction of the suffering of the world. We want to bring one to the other. Yes, we want them to meet, so that yes, we're kind of living with that sense of refuge. We're not just practicing with all these refuges and the power of all those practitioners and the lineage, we're living with them. We're living with those. We carry those with us in our heart. And then we go and we go and have a cup of tea with somebody, or we walk our dog and meet somebody else walking their dog. And in that interaction, we're just very aware of perhaps little everyday things, and we might just exchange a few words about the weather with the person who's walking their dog. And in a way, it's really ordinary, but in another way, behind it is the extraordinary, and something of the extraordinary comes through. And where there's an opportunity, for bodhicitta to alleviate suffering, whether it's teaching the Dharma to lots of people, or whether it's making somebody a cup of tea, that's the expression in this moment of that. Yeah, a lot of the time around Bhante or other spiritual teachers, they won't be talking Dharma all the time. They'll be talking about all kinds of things, and yet somehow you can come away from them feeling as if something else has happened. On a deeper level, you didn't just meet somebody talking about the weather around Herefordshire. You met something else entirely, which went way beyond that. So you get the idea. We're aiming to really bring the everyday and the suffering, the depths of suffering, into real relation with the fullness of the richness of mind, the richness of reality. Yeah, we're aiming to really bring bodhicitta into relationship with things. Okay, there were a couple of little points coming out of the chats that I didn't get a chance to mention. One is, as you get into practicing Tonglen, it's riding on the breath, which can be really helpful. But particularly perhaps as you get more absorbed in a particular situation, or you just engage with the practice, it's as if the movement of sending and receiving takes longer than the breathing. And at that point, if you're not sure, you may somehow sort of try to limit the practice so that it fits into the breathing. But no need to do that. If you're that engaged in the practice and the breathing isn't being a support, which is what it's designed to be, then we just let the breathing, the awareness of the breathing recede. Just keep focusing on your main aim in the practice. Yeah. Okay. I talked about carrying this practice out into life, and the Tonglen practice is a practice that we can do anywhere, anytime. I often think, well, on my deathbed, if I can't do anything else, may I be able, with my last breath, to take in suffering and give out the Dharma, give out the qualities of the Dharma. So it's always available to us. And somebody was asking, well, they weren't quite sure about the relationship between Tonglen and Bodhicitta. Well, the Tonglen is a major practice for the development and sustaining of bodhicitta, and it can stand independently from the Bodhicitta practice as we're doing it here. Yeah, so it's always there, it's always available. And it's a tremendous mind training. It's a tremendous mind training. Usually we come in contact with suffering, and or we suffer, and our first response is, ugh! And the second response is, well, how did that happen? Or why did this happen to me? Or yeah, we don't respond very resourcefully or helpfully to ourselves, or often sometimes to other people. But the practice, yeah, it's training us as we do it again and again and again and again to instate in ourselves to bring about a completely different response to suffering, a really helpful response to suffering. So if we come up against some suffering ourselves, as we learn again and again and again with using the Tonglen and the breathing, first off, we open to that suffering with kindness for ourselves. And then the next response is to go for refuge, to draw on, to call upon those deep resources. That come from beyond the everyday egoic level. And then thirdly, the practice encourages us to realize that we aren't alone in this particular kind of suffering. So the way the practice goes is that whatever's going on in the practice, whatever's going on in the practice, we can take into the Tonglen. So if we're meditating on doing the Bodhicitta practice, and it feels like, oh, I'm all over the place, my mind's just going here and there and everywhere. Okay, we return to a connection with the refuge, and then we use that in the practice. So when we breathe in all the distractedness, all the lost in thoughtness of all living beings. We take all that into our heart, and it dissolves away into the refuge. Yeah? And then we send out clarity and a clear knowing and sharpness of mind and relaxation from worry. We send all those things out. Yeah? So whatever turns up in the practice, we can integrate into the practice. There isn't anything that just is nothing to do with the practice, and we can't work with it. Whatever goes on, we can work with it. If we feel, well, I'm just a total disaster, and I'm never going to be able to do this Tonglen thing. Okay, we open to that with kindness. We take that to the refuge, and we breathe in that sense of uselessness, hopelessness. I'm such a useless human being. I can't do whatever it is I'm trying to do, of all beings. We breathe all that into the refuge, and we send out confidence, we send out support, we send out encouragement. And in that way, and we say we send it out, that also includes us. Yeah, if there's a sense of everyday me sort of still in there somewhere, okay, from the refuge, those qualities come to us as well. So we don't leave ourselves out. And so there's always somewhere to go with the practice. Yeah, the practice is incredibly skillful. Whatever Mara throws at it, there's an answer to it. Yeah? Whatever state we're in. Yeah. So the practice trains us to open to with kindness, to connect with the refuge, which finds resources, and to make us aware that we're not the only one who feels like this, because negative emotions very often, they isolate us. They make us feel like I'm the only one who can't, meditate. I'm the only, all these other people sitting around me, they can all do it. So we break down that sense as well. Yes. So what we're experiencing is just part of the human condition. Human beings feel like this. So rather than it isolating us, it connects us. Do you get the idea? So it's very, very skillful, and it's something that we can really develop over time with practice. We can become very skilled at it, and it's a very skillful way of working with all kinds of emotions and difficulties that we may not feel like we've had much leverage with before, much of a way of working with. And that's the same with the suffering of others. Again, if we're in a situation we hear, so-and-so is really ill or whatever. Again, we're training ourselves to respond, not with horrified anxiety or sort of pulling ourselves away. Oh yes, we often can have a slightly pitying response. Yes, we are. Well, poor thing. But we're safely up and back, thinking, no, that's we're not the ones who are suffering here. Thank goodness. There's a little bit of that. So we're not really kind of meeting the suffering. But through training with this practice, training with Tonglen, we hear about some suffering, or we're faced with some suffering around us, and we can open our heart. We can let ourselves be moved by it, because we connect it to the refuge. We connect it to the resources. We don't have to kind of close down. Usually we close down because we feel like our resources are too limited to meet the suffering. But through this practice, the first response is we find resources. We take it to the refuge. It's suffering, so we take it to the refuge, and we draw on those deep resources, and then we respond from those resources, or we let those resources respond in an appropriate, empathetic way. So it's not just about us sitting on our cushion, sending out lights and imagining everyone being blissful in a sort of one-sided way. It is training us to meet all kinds of situations, all kinds of people, to meet the darkness and the difficulty in us, to meet the suffering in the world. Okay, maybe that's enough for now. We'll carry on this afternoon. There's a lot more to explore. And so probably see where we get to this afternoon. I do have a set of points about Tonglen that Vijayamana and I have sort of put together from our retreats over the years. So at some point, we'll make sure that you get those. Okay, so let's end with a brief period of meditation. So coming back to neutral. Even if mind is racing or emotions are racing, not putting any energy into them, just aware, this is how it is now. Making sure we're connected with the earth. And that our posture is as comfortable and supportive as we can find. Coming into the body, feeling how it is now. So even if we're going to meditate on vast blue sky and archetypal Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, always good to start by connecting with the ground, being with the body. In this way we help integrate the individual and the universal, as Bhante might call it. The profound and the everyday. That paradox of all the potential of the mind expressed through these hands, these feet, these facial expressions. Let's see if it feels right to you. We can link back to that meditation we were doing before, just for a few minutes. So opening to the refuges, opening to the great lineage and sangha of practitioners, opening to the order, opening to us on retreat together. Breathing in all the richness of that. And breathing out, sharing it with the world. And when we're ready, just relaxing. Dedicating the merits and also dedicating ourselves to continue off the cushion, doing what we can to stay in touch with the refuge. Maybe using Tonglen. Being a channel for the refuge, going out into the world. Okay, so I'll see some of you for session 3. Some of you may well be in bed at that point. If so, sleep very well. And, may we all go well and practice well till we see one another again.